When the fighting began between British and Continental soldiers, many people thought the colonists could not win. Great Britain's army was larger and better trained. The British also had money to hire German mercenaries, or soldiers who are paid to fight for another country. The Patriots had to gather an army quickly. Some troops did not even have proper uniforms. Still, the Patriots did have a cause they believed in. For many of them, that was enough to keep them fighting. The first victories. In 1775, a Vermonter named Ethan Allen led a group of soldiers called the Green Mountain Boys. On nearby Lake Champlain, British soldiers controlled Fort Ticonderoga. One morning in May, Allen and his men surprised the troops and captured the fort. Capturing Fort Ticonderoga gave Allen control of 59 cannons, which General George Washington wanted. Washington's troops had surrounded the British soldiers in Boston. Washington could use the cannons to force the British out. But first, he needed to get the cannons. Washington sent Colonel Henry Knox from Boston to Fort Ticonderoga on a daring mission to bring the heavy cannons back. The cannons weighed over 120,000 pounds in all. Using sleds pulled by oxen, Knox's troops dragged the cannons over snow, mud, and ice. The 300-mile journey took 2 months. Once the cannons arrived in Boston, Washington's troops quietly hauled them at night into the hills above the city. The next morning, British commanders were shocked to see the huge guns aimed and ready. They chose to leave rather than fight. On March 17, 1776, the British troops sailed out of Boston Harbor, first to Canada and later to the city of New York. 1. This painting shows Knox's men dragging the cannons to Boston. Draw conclusions about why Knox and his men would have thought it was worth the struggle. One life to lose. Washington tried for months to drive the British out of New York City. In the summer of 1776, he wanted to send spies to the British camp to learn about their battle plans. Nathan Hale, a 21-year-old teacher and captain in the Connecticut Regiment, volunteered for the job. In the fall of 1776, Washington's army suffered defeats at White Plains, which is northwest of the city, and at the Battle of Long Island, New York. Hale was captured by the British and condemned or sentenced to death. He met his fate bravely. He reportedly told the British, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Washington crosses the Delaware. After their defeat at the Battle of Long Island, the Americans retreated into New Jersey. To retreat is to move away from the enemy. The British Army then forced the Patriots from New Jersey into Pennsylvania. Washington and his men grew discouraged. Food and supplies ran low. The general knew they needed a victory, so he planned a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. German mercenaries, known as Hessians, controlled the town for the British. On the night of December 25, Washington and his men started to cross the icy Delaware River. Sailors from Massachusetts rowed soldiers across the river. A snowstorm made the river icy and cold, and the crossing difficult and dangerous. However, Washington's troops landed safely. They arrived in Trenton the next morning and surprised the Hessians. With ease, the Patriots defeated the mercenaries, capturing more than 900 prisoners. Soon after the Battle of Trenton, Washington's troops gained another victory. In nearby Princeton, New Jersey, they drove back 3 British regiments. These victories improved the morale or spirits of the troops. Many of the Patriot soldiers had enlisted or signed up for armed service for only a short time. If they chose to, they could have left the army. The victories at Trenton and Princeton gave Patriot soldiers confidence that the Continental Army could win the war. Many of them enlisted again. 2. Identify the motivations and contributions of Founding Father George Washington and Patriot hero Nathan Hale. How were they similar? 3. Choose colors to show the American and British victories. Use these to color in the battle symbols in the legend and on the map. Analyze why these victories were so important for morale, not just for the troops, but for patriots at home, too. The Battle of Saratoga. In 1777, the British had a new plan of attack. A year earlier, the Patriots had failed to defeat the British in Quebec. British General John Burgoyne took command of these northern troops and led them south from Quebec along Lake Champlain. He planned to capture Albany, New York. Burgoyne expected another British general, William Howe, to come north along the Hudson River to meet him. By controlling the entire river, the British hoped to cut the northeastern part of the country off from the rest of the United States. Burgoyne and his men captured Fort Ticonderoga and then moved on to Saratoga. General Howe was unable to help Burgoyne. King George III had ordered Howe to capture Philadelphia, far to the south. Burgoyne's route to Albany was blocked by Patriot troops. Thaddeus Kosciuszko, a Polish engineer, had helped the Patriots by building a temporary fort near Saratoga, New York. The two sides fought there in September and October. An American officer named Benedict Arnold led attacks on the British. Burgoyne needed reinforcements, or extra troops. His supplies were running low. Without badly needed extra troops and supplies, Burgoyne and the British forces were in trouble. Meanwhile, more and more volunteers joined the Patriots. After 2 fierce battles, Burgoyne was forced to surrender. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point in the war. Before the battle, Benjamin Franklin had tried to convince French leaders to help the Americans. The French, however, weren't sure that the Americans could beat the British. After Saratoga, the French agreed to an alliance, a formal agreement of friendship between countries. They sent ships, troops, and money to help the United States. Benedict Arnold, the hero of Saratoga, later betrayed the Patriots for money and for personal reasons. In 1780, he plotted to surrender the fort at West Point, New York, to the British. The plan failed. He became one of the most famous traitors in American history. 4. Trace the route Burgoyne took to Saratoga. Analyze what you think a victory at Albany would have meant to the British. Washington at Valley Forge. In September 1777, soon after the Battle of Saratoga, the British captured Philadelphia. The Continental Congress was forced to leave that city and move to York, Pennsylvania. Washington's army also retreated, setting up camp at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania for the winter. Camp life at Valley Forge was harsh. Scarce food and a lack of warm clothing added to that winter's hardship or suffering. More than 2,500 men died of disease, hunger, or cold. Washington worked hard to get the supplies his troops needed. By spring, soldiers had more food and clothing. They also had help from a German officer named Friedrich von Steuben. At Valley Forge, he taught officers how to train their own soldiers. The soldiers' improved skills turned them into a serious fighting force. This helped develop the U.S. military. 5. Think about what Washington's soldiers at Valley Forge went through. Write a letter home from Valley Forge. Explain to your family what you are going through. Women of the Revolution. Many women played important roles in the war. Martha Washington traveled with her husband, visiting with troops and helping soldiers. Other women cooked, carried water, made clothes for troops, and served as nurses for the sick and wounded. Women who carried water to soldiers on the battlefield earned the nickname Molly Pitcher. Mary Ludwig Hayes of New Jersey was probably one of them. As the story goes, when her husband was injured, Hayes took his place firing cannons at the British. Other women worked as spies or messengers for the army. Deborah Sampson even dressed in men's clothes and secretly joined the army. She fought in several battles before anyone discovered she was a woman. Women did not have to be close to the battlefield to help the war effort. Phyllis Wheatley, a former slave, wrote poetry about the colonists' struggle for freedom and spoke out against slavery. Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, believed strongly in independence and in rights for women. While John was at the Second Continental Congress, she wrote him letters saying, "In the new code of laws, remember the ladies." 6. Fill in the chart with facts about each woman, identifying how she helped the revolutionary cause. American Indians in the Revolution. Different American Indian nations fought on different sides during the war. Those who fought with the British, such as the Cherokee, wanted the colonists to stop taking their land. They hoped that the British would help them. Joseph Brant, a Mohawk leader, met with King George III before the war and told his people to side with the British. Other American Indian groups, such as the Oneida and many Tuscarora, fought on the Patriot side. Many other American Indians remained neutral. Got it? 7. Cause and effect. Identify 2 effects of the Patriots' victory at the Battle of Saratoga. 8. You live on a farm in Pennsylvania. The war has been going on for several years. Describe how you and your family support the ideas you believe in. 9. Summarize how von Steuben helped to develop the U.S. military during his time at Valley Forge.